Hey guys, it's Shara from Woodshop Diaries, and with spring finally here, I'm so excited to be able to spruce up the front porch of our new garage apartment house. The past 2 years, I've made some fun wooden planters for the front porch, but this year I wanted something a little different. Sticking with the modern theme of the new house, I went with a concrete planter pot. I've worked with concrete a little before, but mostly for landscape curbs and sidewalks, so making this concrete planter pot was a bit of a learning curve. And while making a do-it-yourself concrete planter pot isn't exactly a brand new idea, I did add a cool wooden bottom to distinguish it a little from the others and to give it some height since the pot was actually a little shorter than I wanted it to be. I learned a lot of things in this project and I'm excited to share the good, the bad, and the ugly with you right now. So if you're ready to get building, let's go. I started out knowing I wanted this wooden base for the pot, but didn't know how thick I wanted it to be. I played around with a few different sized boards and decided that a 2x4 turned on its side looked pretty good proportionally, so I went with that. Because I was going to be gluing them together to make the base, I wanted the surfaces to be nice and smooth, so I ran the board through the planer, then squared off one of the edges on the table saw. This was to give the top of the base a nice smooth surface and a crisp edge. Later on, I used my router to round over the edges of the base, so really I didn't have to square these edges, but it does give it a much better surface to adhere the concrete planter pot to. Once the 2x4 was milled down, I took it to the miter saw and cut the board down to several 4-inch long blocks and 2 8-inch long blocks for the ends. I arranged these to make sure that the bucket I would be using for the concrete mold would fit on the top just like shown. Then I began the gluing process. Now it may have been easier in the long run to cut progressively longer boards to glue together instead of doing it this way with a big hole in the middle, but this way saved a little bit of lumber and gave me an automatic drainage hole. I arranged the blocks like shown and made sure that the edges of the board were barely sticking out from under the bucket and traced around it. Then I proceeded to glue the boards together, lining up the lines where I had traced. And this is a great time to let you know that if you're curious about any of the products used in this project, I'll put a link in the description below to my blog post that will list out all the products used and all the details of this project. Be sure also to hit that subscribe button so that you don't miss out on any of my coming up videos. And if you like what you see here, I'd love it if you'd give it a thumbs up or leave a comment below, and also let me know what other kinds of concrete projects you'd like to see. Once everything was glued, I set it in 2 bar clamps, but it was kind of hard to keep it nice and level. I fidgeted with it a little and then decided it would be best to clamp a piece of scrap plywood to keep it flat while it dried. I was sure to wipe the excess glue before I did that so that I didn't glue the plywood to the base. While the glue dried, I moved on to the concrete part of the project. Because I wanted a nice smooth surface on my pot, I used this super finish mix and I highly recommend it for this. It's much finer than the regular concrete mix and cures up so much smoother. It's a little more expensive, but totally worth it. I used 3 buckets for this, 1 to mix in and 2 for the molds. I mixed the concrete in batches so it would be easy to mix well and pour. I mixed way more water than is recommended on the bag, but it made it so much easier to level and to work with. Once it was the consistency of a thick milkshake, I poured it into the mold bucket. Ignore the PVC pipe in the bottom of the bucket. I tried using that for a drainage hole, but it got filled with concrete, so scratch that idea. We'll just deal with that later. Once the bottom half of the mold bucket was full, I placed the smaller bucket in and used my hands to work the concrete around the edges of it. If you notice the air bubbles in my finished pot, it's where I wasn't able to get all the bubbles out in this area. It's so narrow, it's hard to work it down and get all the air out. Just do the best you can and call it character if you get a few bubbles in your planter. Also, be aware that when working with concrete, you should always wear a dust mask and wear watertight gloves. Because the small bucket was trying to float, I used some leftover towel from our kitchen to hold it down and in place. Because the concrete was so wet, it was hard to get it to stay put, but I finally got it where I wanted it and slowly backed away. While the concrete was drying, I was a little anxious, so I started cutting my base out. This was just a waste of time really, because until the pot gets out of the mold, you won't know what size to make it exactly. But I cut around the lines anyway. It just left it a little bit big so that I could cut it down to the exact size later. Then I waited for 3 long days for the concrete to cure. I probably should have waited a little bit longer, but I'm impatient. To remove the concrete from the mold, I used a utility knife to cut out the small bucket and to cut away the big bucket. My concrete was still a little wet when I did this, so you can see some knife marks on the outside of the bucket. Whoops, that's just a little bit more character, I guess. Once I got the concrete free, I carried the pot over to the base and traced around it, and then I cut the base out for real on the bandsaw and sanded the edges smooth. Because the pot had a rounded bottom, I used my router to round over the edges of the base so that it wouldn't look so stark against the round edge when I glued them together. Then I applied a wood stain. One thing to note here is that because this will be exposed to draining water, it might be a good idea to somehow seal the inside edges of the 2x4s in the middle. I didn't think about that until after the fact. I flipped the pot over, and remember me telling you about that PVC pipe for drainage? Well, it filled up with concrete, as you can see. So I just used a concrete drill bit and drilled a small drainage hole in the center of the pot. Because this was pretty heavy, I went ahead and moved it to where I wanted to put it on the porch to glue them together so that I wouldn't have to haul it in one big piece later. I applied some Gorilla Glue construction adhesive to the base and set the pot on top. Then I made sure it was all centered and any squeeze out was cleaned up before I walked away. Finally, once the adhesive was dry, I applied some sealer to both the wood and the concrete. This will protect them from the outside elements and also darken the concrete a little bit. Then I planted a cute little lamb's ear plant in it and it was finished. I love how simple this project is and how cheap it was too. The bag of concrete plus a simple 2x4 is only about $8 and I've got concrete left over to make another pot. So I hope you guys enjoyed this project and are interested in seeing a few more concrete projects because I had a lot of fun with this one and I have a feeling I'll be doing a few more soon. So be sure to subscribe to my channel and check out my website at woodshopdiaries.com for more fun do-it-yourself ideas so you don't miss out on what's coming next. See you next time.